I have no idea who the author of the 1888 Ixora, A Mystery is. The pencil note on the title page is too faded, but he's identified as J. or John Harrison. But this name is so common, and Ixora itself is a species of shrub, hence why these two items bring up nothing. The narrator is wandering the streets of Bristol when the rain forces him to seek shelter in the shop of the pawnbroker Hernandez. Buying a painting of some value, he is led below by the man's lovely daughters, and shown the remains of the dungeons of the old castle of Bristol, and is shown the pot where the flesh of Sir Hugh Despenser was cooked before being served to the dogs. Hearing the aged great-grandmother singing nonsense songs in a nearby room, the old woman becomes frenzied when seeing the narrator, and keeps calling him a demon and Judas, and hinting of his role in a dark family tragedy of 2 centuries ago. She points to an ancient picture of a woman named Ixora before having a near-fatal fit. Hernandez confides in him how years ago a different stranger entered the house, and his grandmother's room which he never left. But when Hernandez entered, he was gone and left behind only a book. This book, which the narrator copies frenziedly before Hernandez forces him to leave the house, contains the story of Ixora. A week later, the narrator returns to the house as he promised, but the entire family moved out, no one knows where. Him now left with only a partial record of the story. Ixora, an ancestress of the Hernandez family, had been accused of being a sorceress and was burned at the stake in an outright affair in 1680. Some years after, her relative Pedro travels to Barbados to look for a ghost that is said to haunt those shores. He is warned not to by a mariner who says he and his mate sunk a ship at that shore with 500 men aboard whose ghosts now haunt these waters. Pedro goes ashore amid the storm and is met by a jester. This, with veiled and ill-omened words, leads him to the apparition of Ixora, with whom he falls in love. The two proceed to walk back and forth along the island, Ixora disappearing at each sunrise. By and by she tells him of her love to a knight and how the king sought her for his own, and how she refused. Their interview is cut short by the appearance of the devil, eager for a chat with Pedro, and calls himself his warmest friend, demanding Pedro pledge his soul to save Ixora from the fire. Baffled by a gap in his manuscript, the narrator is visited by a strange man, who says his daughter's immortal soul is in danger and gives him a further bit of the lost document, but not before stomping on it. This turns out to be a document detailing Pedro's interrogation by the Inquisition, due to that whole raising a dead woman and such, but they get nothing out of him. Years later, after the narrator gives up on completing the story, he is visited by the ghost of Hernandez who died in Trinidad, and when trying to find out the truth, the narrator finds out the Hernandez family is living a short distance from the old shop, and a certain Mr. Nathan tells him how the last of the Hernandez name came to the house after 200 years and died in front of him. This man was Pedro, who gave his soul to free Ixora from torment. You may think this sounds promising, and it does. And it was promising in the beginning, but I still hated almost every second of reading this book. And that is because everything except the part dealing with the narrator in the present is written in verse. Over 100 pages of nothing but verse. And worse, from a certain point on, the verse barely continues the story at all, and Harrison just goes on his poetical similes and peregrinations. A very interesting opening and ending is ruined by what a reviewer even at the time called harebrained verse, and hence my need to read the book and extract what story there is so none of you have to.